damals war es schon Vodafone.
Das wollte ich mich gerade
Da
sagen.
war es gerade Vodafone.
Den Job sozusagen überhaupt je angetreten hast, als Security Officer von Mannesmann Telekom warst. Weil da war ja die Zeit, wo der Deal lief.
Also die Firma hat ihren Namen dreimal geändert im halben Jahr, es war ein bisschen anstrengend. Ja.
Auf jeden Fall, Martin ist auch so aus meiner Sicht ein Urgestein der deutschen Security-Szene. Manche werden vielleicht noch 95. Das O'Reilly Buch zu Satan. Es gab früher mal einen Security-Scanner namens Satan von Dieter Wennemann und Dan Farmer, die auch den Vortrag gehalten hatten, aus dem der Begriff Maytest überhaupt kommt. How to protect the site by breaking into it. Auf jeden Fall, er hat darüber noch das irgendwann ein O'Reilly-Buch geschrieben, das verdeutlicht so ein bisschen, dass hier jemand steht, der nicht erst seit gestern Security macht und bin ganz froh, dass er kommen konnte und uns ein bisschen was darüber erzählt, was denn so in ISO 27000 Audits gut oder auch weniger gut laufen. Danke fürs Vortrag.
Okay, danke Enno für diese glühende Einleitung. Ja, ich halte den Vortrag dann auch mal auf Deutsch. Bin aber auch der englischen Sprache mächtig, also Sie können noch Veto einlegen. Ja, wie man durch ein Audit fällt. Audits sind grundsätzlich ein sehr ernstes Thema, weil sie kosten Geld und man kann durchfallen. Und wenn man das tut, kosten sie noch mehr Geld. Dieser Vortrag ist nicht ganz so ernst, weil ich habe eigentlich die letzten 10 Jahre immer Vorträge darüber gehalten, wie man Compliance herstellt zu Security-Standards und wie man sinnvolle Audits macht. Und das ist eigentlich, diese ganzen Compliance-Themen sind ja oft ziemlich langweilig und deswegen dachte ich, mache ich es mal andersrum. Ich erzähle Ihnen mal, was man alles falsch machen kann. Das ist viel lustiger, weil man lacht ja auch immer gerne über die Fehler anderer. Und man kann trotzdem ein paar Sachen aufzeigen, die aus meiner Erfahrung doch immer ganz häufig schief gehen. Warum maße ich mir das an? Ich bin tatsächlich ein akkreditierter Auditor bei einer Zertifizierungsstelle. Darf also nicht nur, wie das ja viele Firmen machen, diese Audits einfach so durchführen, sondern tatsächlich auch Zertifizierungsaudits machen für ISO 27001 und für einige andere Standards. Wir beraten natürlich auch Firmen, die sich auf diese Standards hinbewegen, dabei, wie sie sowas umsetzen. Und man erlebt doch einige ganz lustige Dinge dabei, die möchte ich also dann im Rahmen dieses Vortrags mal zum Besten geben. Darüber möchte ich sprechen. Vielleicht eine kleine Einführung in ISO 27001 anhand von ein paar Bildern. Für diejenigen von Ihnen, die damit noch nicht so viel zu tun hatten, wenn Sie jetzt alle sagen, es ist langweilig, wir wissen genau, was das für ein Standard ist und was Security Standards und Sicherheitsmanagement sind, dann lasse ich das bleiben. Okay, no problem. I'll switch to English then, no problem. Okay, what I want to talk about is a very short introduction to ISO 27001. For those of you who wonder what that is about, because I think many of you are more from the technical side of security and may not be so familiar with all this compliance scene. And things that go wrong before the audit, in the planning stage, during audits, after the audit, and of course, once you start doing audits, you tend to do it again and again, and if you're having a security certification, you have to have regular audits anyway, so it never ends really, a never-ending story. Okay, this short introduction to 27001 and audits. We all know, you're all security professionals, we all know that vulnerabilities in hacking and firewalls, this is exciting stuff, but it's of course only one part of the security picture. And this is nothing new. A quote here from someone you all know. Bruce Schneier said this, I don't know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Technology doesn't solve security problems. We all agreed on that, and if you have consultants in your company, you will pay them lots of money and they'll tell you the exact same thing. But the question, of course, is what's missing if technology is not the answer. What's missing is a global view You may have seen this picture before. It's been around on the internet. Very nice. Somebody wanted access control, obviously, so there's a security measure for access control. Nobody said it's a good measure. But on a more abstract level, think of that as a packet inspection firewall in front of a web application. More or less the same thing. Think of it as a web application firewall in front of many Web 2.0 applications. We tend to put security measures in place without looking at the big picture, without looking at what we really need from a business perspective. So what we basically need is something to help us decide what is good security, what from a global perspective do I need, what's missing. Missing some help in making the right decisions about what security measures to implement. And of course there's stuff like Leth, one of my famous authors, an Austrian from last century. When in doubt, do the right thing, which doesn't really help, of course. It's just a nice saying. So we need something that can serve as a basis for security decisions, and this is where the standard ISO 27001 comes in. It's about understanding what you do and where the risks are. ISO 27001 is not a security standard like many others where you have a checklist which you go through sequentially, make a mark and say, okay, encryption, I have that, finished, next item. But ISO 27001, for example, on encryption says so you need to think about where do you need encryption. You need to justify why you need it, or if you don't need it, you need a justification for that. You need to justify, okay, how do I select algorithms? What do I do about key management and stuff like that? So it's a standard that forces you to really think about what your company's security needs are. It's about management and control. Unfortunately, Germans tend to translate control as Kontrolle, which is a slightly different thing. It's about taking control. It's about steering. It's about managing security. It's about processes, about all this boring stuff. It's about documentation. It's about corrective and preventive actions. A management review, meaning that the management of a company must, at least once a year, review the complete situation and try to improve it. And it's, of course, also about technologies to support this, because obviously you do need some technology. It's not just processes. And if you're familiar with quality management, say EEC, it's almost like ISO 9000, all these processes, which is a bad thing, of course, because ISO 9000 has a very bad name. Everybody thinks it's extremely boring. And well, you're right, it is boring. Unfortunately, security management is a lot like quality management. Security management is about being able to answer very basic questions. Like, for my company, for my job, what's the difference between good and bad security? Surprisingly difficult to answer. When we heard the keynote from Pete Herzog just now, who has his way of answering what is good and bad security, but there's no one single way you can do that really. We really need to think about what's good for me, what's good for my company, and also what's economically feasible. You don't have unlimited amounts of money to spend, so not so easy. How do you implement security? How do you ensure you have good security? How do you measure security? You need to find out for your company, how good am I? Not because some people are telling you that measuring security is about saying, when somebody asks you the question, how secure are you, you can say 42, or 50, or 30, whatever. My personal opinion is this is a lot of bullshit. But of course, your boss will want to know if you have a security budget and you spend it, and you will want to know, okay, is our security situation better or is it worse now? Do you get a return on investment from a security budget? And to answer that question, you have to be able to measure security in some way. And it's the same with quality, really. So this is more or less the same, really, as boring as it is. So what we really need is an understanding of the business requirements for security. Sometimes these are obvious. If you're rolling out a new technology in mobile telecommunications, for instance, if you're rolling out UMTS or long-term evolution technology, the security implications are obvious and you know what's going to happen. You have problems in the encryption, you have problems in the technical layer, you have problems in the network layer. Sometimes it's not so easy to say the business model, what are the security needs. But this is the basis, and this is also what the auditor will want to check, is do you really understand what the security implications of your business are, how security affects your business. What we don't need is tools. Well, this nice Dilbert comic on risk management tools. There's a whole boatload of risk management tools out there, and it's really mostly bullshit, because it's just glorified spreadsheets that change data you already have into another format. You don't learn anything. Or they generate huge amounts of new data that you really can't do anything with. For example, most vulnerability scanners out there have compliance modules these days. I know Qualys has one, others too, that say, okay, you're 27001 compliant or PCI compliant for the credit card security. This is a lot of bullshit, because all these standards, they say nothing about vulnerability scanning. In particular, ISO 27001 is completely removed from vulnerability scanning. It's a completely different perspective on security. So don't show an auditor your brand new risk management tool, because he will probably laugh. This is not what it's about. But 27001 needs audits, because this business perspective, knowing what security is right for you, is something that you can design, but if you make mistakes designing it, you will never find them yourself. You need an outside perspective. So you really need someone external to come. And that brings us back to audits, which is what this talk is all about anyway. To get this different perspective, and because risks are often not where you think they are for a business. I found this nice picture about the handling of bombs. The main risk in handling explosive material is not that the material will explode, but that people will do stupid things with it. That's also true within a lot of other situations. So that's something that an auditor probably would have seen coming during an audit, because auditors tend to look at these things in a different way. Auditors always assume the bad things. Besides third-party input, you have audits for security certifications. There aren't really so many security certifications. You have ISO 27001, which some companies do. More and more companies do. You have PCI, this is payment card industry standard for those of you who operate with credit cards. But this is a standard where you don't have a choice in being compliant or not. If you handle credit card data, you have to be compliant, so you have to have an audit. There's really not much else. There's the typical German version of ISO 27001 from the BSE, which is more or less the same thing. And that's it, basically. There are not so many standards to choose from. If they are for security certification, audits are more like an examination, really, which I have the feeling is the German view of what audits are all about anyway. if you do an audit in the UK or in the Netherlands, they see you as sort of a friendly guy who gives you advice. If you do an audit in Germany, it's always a teacher-pupil situation. They're always very frightened of failing. I don't know. It's something very German in that. Okay, so what can we basically do wrong in audits? Oh God, what have we done? That's when starting an audit, the situation. What the auditor thinks really is that audits are done because the customer actually wants to have an audit and maybe have a security certification. But apparently, that's only what the auditor thinks when he comes to a company. What really happens is an auditor gets the contract and then immediately he's the enemy who wants the company to fail. Very strange mindset, that's because companies spend a lot of money on audits. If you're thinking about large telecommunications companies, they have budgets for audits that go into millions. And it's a really strange mindset to give this to someone you hate. But this is what happens, really. This is also something to think about if you yourself are having audits in your company. Try to see the good side. There is a good side, actually. Don't treat the auditor as the enemy, because he will hate you back. This is what happens. Okay. But before the audit starts, what a lot of companies do, of course, you have to haggle. You have to discuss the price for hours and days and weeks on end. Either with a certification body, which can't do anything about it because there are rules about how long an audit can take. The rules are in place because in former times there were certificates you could just buy, basically. Auditor would come, take a short look and say, yeah, it's all okay, here's the certificate. To prevent that from happening, there are rules that there must be a minimum time spent at the company. So nothing to be done about that. Or you can haggle with the auditor, who can't do anything about this anyway, because he's at the end of the food chain. You normally don't have a contract with the auditor, but with the certification body. So all this happens is that everybody is in a bad mood before it starts. And this is actually something I've heard from a company in Karlsruhe in Germany. Why pay money for being tortured? We always take the cheapest guy we can find to do the audit. That's of course economically sound. I mean, when you buy something, you don't want to buy the most expensive stuff. You try to look for something that's cheap. But you don't want a cheap auditor, you want a good auditor. You want an auditor who actually understands what he's doing. There's a difference. I don't know if you can read that. These are examples, not examples from a technical audit on a large telecommunications infrastructure, and examples of very bad audits. It says the Apache web server is outdated. This version is affected by several security issues, including DOS, buffer overflows, cross-site scripting, and similar. Okay, the first question, of course, is what the heck does this mean? What kind of problem do we have? What version of the Apache web server is there? Because when you're talking about a large audit, it's a moving target. You can't just say the Apache web server is updated. It may have been upgraded in the meantime. And of course, nobody knows what specific problem there is, and we don't know if this problem affects us, because in this particular case, it was a voice over IP server. It's a completely segregated network where there is probably no problem at all. So this is just a finding where we put them. Or also very nice. Two findings from the same audit. A backup concept exists and defines the relevant aspects, and in another situation, there is no backup concept, but it's already in work. People are working on it. So okay, so we wonder why that is a finding. If there is a backup strategy and people are working on it. And one finding later, it says a backup concept does not exist. Okay, great. The problem is, okay, that was a cheap audit, and you can say, okay, it wasn't very good, not a big problem. It is a big problem because in the end, system administrators get the audit results and they're told to do something about it, and they get confused when they read this, they get frustrated. The next time somebody does an audit, it won't work very well because everybody is frustrated and thinks auditors are complete idiots. So it does make sense really to spend maybe 10 euro more per hour and get an auditor that actually knows what he's doing. Okay, what else? Never prepare. The situation we had only a couple of months ago at a large airline. I mean, you always think that if you have companies with 50,000 employees and you have an audit there, that they are actually interested in doing this and prepare and have documentation ready and have the systems cleaned up. Actually, no, you come there, everybody's surprised. Oh, you're the auditor. Nobody's there, and documents are lost. We don't know. We have a security policy. I've seen it, but it's gone. And we have to talk about strategic issues in the casino, and we have to whisper because nobody's supposed to hear this, but there's no other place we can talk. Stuff like that, really strange. So, yeah, strangely enough, this really happens. If you ever have an audit that you want to take place, be sure to prepare, be sure to have meeting rooms, and be sure to actually have all the stuff that you need for the audit there, because it's really painful for the auditor to come somewhere and then to have to wait for a couple of hours for people to collect documentation. Is really silly. And of course, never prepare staff for an audit. This is really great. You need to talk, for example, to a very young system administrator, and he gets told by his boss, okay, there's an audit, and it's all your fault if we fail. Go talk to the auditor and make a good impression. Then you talk to a guy who's white in the face and sweating. And of course, doesn't really make sense. If you have an audit coming up, you want to brief your employees. And if you don't know how to do this, there are companies out there who can help you. Basically, prepare your employees how to talk to an auditor, how to do these situations. These examination-type atmospheres are not really helpful to anybody. And then, of course, this is one of my highlights. An auditor from a British company who got to Düsseldorf Airport on Weiberfastnacht and arrived at a large telecommunications company with a very wild and crazy look in his eyes because he got his tie cut and the one sleeve of his suit was torn off. Because that's a really good start for an audit. You have this nice guy coming over who probably doesn't even know what's happening in this wild country. So these are things you know in advance. Maybe you don't do serious audits during Carnival in Germany or Switzerland. Switzerland has the same Carnival problem as Germany. This is also really great. I once was at an audit in Korea. And it's not really surprising that if you're at a Korean company, the people don't speak German. I mean, it doesn't really take much brain power to realize that. So you want to send an auditor that speaks English probably, and you want to make sure that the people you talk to also can speak English. I mean, it's not, you can't just say that everybody understands some English. It's not true. It's not even true in Germany. So this is something you can prepare for, really. One wonders, it happens all the time, really, when you're, that you either get auditors from British certification bodies in Germany, and then people find out that they can't really speak to each other in English because their command of English is not good enough. Well, you know that in advance, really. It's not so difficult. Okay, first impressions. These are all true stories. I mean, auditors do open cabinets. You know, you have these Großflächenbüros. You have big areas, and you have floor-to-ceiling cabinets. You know the setup for many meters on end. And when you go there, you open one cabinet, and it's full of empty beer bottles from floor to ceiling. Then you open the next one, and it's also full of empty beer bottles. Then you go to the room, and all the cabinets are full of empty beer bottles. Amazing. It must have taken months, if not years of work to actually drink all that beer. The deposit on the bottles alone probably pays for a salary. One wonders why this isn't cleaned up, especially if you know that somebody is coming to take a look. I mean, it obviously doesn't have anything to do with information security. But still, if you have an auditor who is in a bad mood, you can construct a lot of stupid findings from obviously drunk people in the company, because obviously somebody has drunk all the stuff. So take care of the simple things. This also happens a lot. You have these Doppelboden in German, the raised floors. You'd be surprised if you open up tiles what you find in there. Because it's nice and cold down there. So you have crates of beer, you have wine, you have schnapps, you have whiskey bottles. Okay, it's also nothing to do with information security, but if you open up the floor in the data center and find not one bottle, but also a huge amount, you start to wonder if the system administrators are sober, if there are wild parties happening in there. You start to look more closely at things. So this is also something that you can clean up. I mean, it's not a secret. Usually you know if you have this in the company before the auditor comes. Do something about it.
I mean the idea of the data center being at times warm, finding umbrellas. Which the data center is raining, and they put the umbrellas.
Yeah, I mean, especially in smaller companies, a lot of stuff ends up in the data center because there's room there, it's nice and dry, and everything that doesn't fit anywhere else gets put into the data center. Small companies do that a lot, which is, of course, not good. I mean, the strangest thing I've seen are from a security consulting company, no less. We had just four racks, and you open up the racks, and two of them are full of waste paper, from floor to 2 meters high. Because obviously the boss said, "Oh, tomorrow the auditor is coming, and quick clean up the room," and then they just put all the waste paper into the racks. This is, of course, generally not a good idea. I see this a lot in smaller companies where they put old paper and Akten into the data center, because, of course, when you have a fire, it usually starts in the data center, so you don't want to do that. But again, this is something you can check before the auditor comes. It doesn't really need an auditor to discover this. This is really amazing. Software company with a rather big data center, and it only happened once. We found a set of women's underwear in the raised floor. So this is one time when I really didn't know what to put in the report of that. But again, this is also something, just taking a walk through the data center before the auditor comes will clear this up, and you won't have any bad situations with the auditor. I mean, there are auditors who laugh about these things, and you can have auditors who make a big story out of that. And again, it has nothing to do with information security, but still it's strange. And the more professional the data centers are, the stranger it gets, really. I mean, you also have the opposites, of course. You have data centers which are completely spotless. There's not a grain of dust anywhere. No pencil, not even one sheet of paper lying around. That's, well, obviously someone cleaned up just in the morning, because nobody is that clean. But okay, it's good. You don't know how it looks tomorrow. You go to a data center like that, it's probably different, but at that day it was okay.
Yeah, I mean that's what auditors are.
Yeah.
Quality assurance.
Yeah.
And if they just do it right one day a year, that's better than not doing it right.
Yeah, I mean that's a good side of having audits. You do have regular cleaning because you know somebody is going to check. There are companies who wouldn't have regular cleaning otherwise. Okay, during the audit, this is a classic for me, also from a telecommunications company. It's all documented. Look in the bloody docs. Why do you ask me? There's a lot of frustration in there. First, they asked me to do all these security policies and write down what I'm doing and do procedures. And then they asked me what I wrote down. Why don't they bloody read it? Well, that's how it works, really. The auditor, of course, doesn't just want to see that you have a lot of paperwork, but he wants to see that actually somebody has read it and understood it, so he asks questions of people. This type of reaction we get a lot. So it's something to do with preparing for an audit, prepare your staff, basically, what is going to happen, why the auditor is asking all these kind of silly questions. And another classic, I was witness to that. There was a British auditor asking about administration processes, and the answer he got was basically an explanation of the process model in Unix. It was really brilliant, because for 15 minutes both sides were talking about processes. One about very abstract view of processes and one about Unix processes, and they didn't understand each other at all. Again, this is something to do with preparing for an audit. There's this tendency when technical staff are interviewed by an auditor that they over-explain things, that they try to impress the auditor with their technical knowledge and explain to him in detail how a piece of software works or how the network works. And quite often you have auditors who are not really that good in technology and don't understand a word of what the guy is telling them. Quite often you have auditors coming from quality management who now do security audits. And you have someone who explains to them how exactly they're doing port security on a switch, or how exactly they're implementing access control, or how they're protecting against ARP spoofing or whatever. Then the auditor just goes tilt, doesn't understand anything anymore. So this can be a problem depending on what kind of auditor you get. And this is also something one can discuss with the staff that is interviewed before the audit, just to prevent these kinds of misunderstandings. The executive view. ISO 27000 explicitly states that there has to be management support. There's quite a large section about that in the standard. And This is also a classic. Management support. Oh, this actually means me. I thought this was network management. And this is a sign of the times. There are so many managements. People are talking about supply chain management, about service delivery management, about network management, about management here and management there. That a lot of managers are forgetting that their job is actually to manage, not to have a tool that does management. And what what 27001 wants is really management support. The management of the company needs to actively support the security policy, which is a good thing. But that also means that the management needs to understand what this is about, needs to have read at least the high-level security policy. It needs to understand some basic things like risk management, what is risk management, stuff like that. It happens quite a lot in certification audits that people are basically afraid of training their CEO. I mean, sometimes they are of course right, because there are a lot of CEOs who think they already know everything and don't want to be trained. But of course, this is always a painful situation in audits when you have to basically tell the management that their company is failing in audit because of them, because they don't understand the security requirements put upon them. So this is quite important. Train your managers in security. There's no way around it, really. Because, I mean, you've probably all seen the situations. You have brilliant technology, for example, for encrypting mail, for securing notebooks, and you have managers who just don't use that. And it's their right. When they are managers, they can say, okay, I don't want to do that, period. Then nobody can argue with them. But they need to understand that there's a risk associated with that. That's the job of the security manager in the company, the ISO or CISO, whatever you call it, to educate his management. That's brilliant. That's from an automotive company. We only have one process in the company, permanent improvement. Yeah, and in English they say up yours. So that's bullshit, of course. I mean, if you need a new pencil, you don't think about how to improve the company when buying a new pencil. You just buy a new pencil. Complete bullshit. This is from quality management. ISO 9000 has this process, this kontinuierlicher Verbesserungsprozess, continual improvement. And some people think this is a brilliant idea to have, but it's of course much too abstract. This is no use at all for security. You have to be a bit more specific than that when defining work processes. Yeah, okay, so much for privacy. This is the usual answer when you do security audit and you ask who's the privacy officer, the Datenschutzbeauftragter. At least in Germany, I have other experience in other countries. In Switzerland, I've had a lot in Switzerland, and people at least know who's the privacy officer. But then the privacy laws are different there than in Germany. So I think for the privacy, this is a long way to go. Okay. This also happens quite a lot. You do security audits. You have sometimes brilliant policies about segregation of duties and 4Is principle, and then you look at the systems and they're all wide open. Everybody can do anything. And people tend to not to realize that it doesn't really matter if we are colleagues here or not. You need to have also some technical stuff here. It doesn't just help to have a policy and saying, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that, but you have to implement this. It doesn't really matter. Your colleagues can be your enemy too. I mean, a company needs to protect itself also against bad employees. That's of course, also a classic. Why do incident management when you never have incidents? There are, in fact, quite a lot of companies out there who really don't have incidents because they don't know what an incident is, because they've never defined it. Also, many companies have incidents and never found out actually that they have one. So you see a lot. Even during ISO 27001 audits, it's very abstract. It's not very technical. So you sometimes look at systems, you look at log files, and you ask, why are people from the internet browsing through your database? And then they go, oops. So that's also, of course, one sure sign the Chief Information Security Officer doesn't really know what he's talking about. Nice, that's from a bank. We don't do preventive measures in security. We don't have enough staff, or we don't have enough budget for that. So basically they say, okay, we don't care, we just react. If something happens, we obviously need to do something because of the bad press we'll get, but otherwise we don't do anything. Really neat. This is, of course, stupid because having preventive measures saves staff from doing reactive measures, so it's obviously silly. That is quite interesting, I think. We don't need to be compliant to laws. We have a legal department. ISO 27001 explicitly states that you have that you need to think about what laws you need to be compliant with, and that's not an option. I mean, a lot of people tend to think, okay, I need to be compliant to Datenschutzgesetz, for instance, and then I need to do that or that. Well, that's really an option. It's a law. You have to be compliant. Period. There are other security standards. If it's just an ISO standard, it's your choice. You can be either compliant or not. It's your decision. If it's a law, you have to be conformant. That's an interesting statement. I don't need to be compliant. This law doesn't apply to me. We have a legal department. I'm still not really sure what to do with that. It's of course bullshit because everybody has to comply to laws independent of the legal department. But this is interesting in that in a lot of security certifications you have scopes. You don't do a certification for the complete company, but you can do a certification for the data center alone. A lot of companies do that. And if the legal department is out of the scope, what then? You don't need to be compliant to anything? No, it can't be true. Training of employees is not my responsibility. That's human resources does that. That's of course also bullshit. It's both true and meaningless. Of course, human resources takes care of training, but they take care of keeping training records. It's a different thing. And of course, the Chief Information Security Officer is responsible for training the employees in the company on security awareness. And of course, normally when you do a certification audit, it's mandatory that the CEO of the company is there at least for 5 minutes to say that yes, he wants to be compliant. And if he isn't there, that can happen once, of course, but it can't happen 2 or 3 times in a row, so something's wrong there. Okay, what happened during the audit? What I always find amazing is that quite a lot of companies, quite a lot of people that you interview take the opportunity to say bad things about the company they work for. Oh, it's also horrible here, and security is so bad, and my boss doesn't understand me, and I could do so much more, but I'm not allowed to. The technology out there is so brilliant, but we're using this old shit. Especially, yeah, focus on the things that don't work. In my mind, that's a German problem, really. If you do audits in the UK, people tell you what's good about the company. If you ask, for example, how do you realize encrypted access to systems for systems administration. They say, oh yeah, we're using Secure Shell and it's really brilliant and we're using this version and we implemented that 2 years ago and it's good and we have key management. And, if you ask a German system administrator that, they say, yeah, oh, we're using SSH, we're using version 2 and it has these problems and it's all a piece of shit and there are lots of papers saying there are vulnerabilities in there and they're basically saying the same things but in a very different manner. So of course, this is also something really you need to prepare people for. You focus on the things that work when you talk to an auditor. The auditor will find enough things that don't work on his own. You don't need to present more things that don't work to him. Okay? I mean, what you want to do is pass the audit. Yeah.
Very interesting aspect.
Yeah.
For example, Germans tend to present problems and discuss them and so, and on the other hand, some other countries more tend to just hide things and so.
Yeah, I think, I agree. It's a cultural difference. I mean, also some people focus on solutions. Say, okay, it works. Might not be the best, but it works. It's okay. And a lot of people in Germany who focus on the things that don't work and on the negative side. Okay, what audit? Of course, every company learns that when you have an auditor there for 2 days, the best strategy is, of course, to just waste as much time as possible because then the auditor doesn't have time to ask questions. So, number one way to waste time, and of course auditors know that. I mean, only rookies, only beginners get fooled by that, is explain the organization chart. Past, present, and future, do it multiple times. I mean, this is really amazing. At bigger companies, the organization chart is extremely important. You sometimes feel like you're inside a Dilbert comic. People explain who they work for, whom they worked for in the past, and how it will all change next month after the reorganization. And big companies are always reorganizing. And you could always explain for hours on end. And it's so interesting to them. I mean, I had a situation once where I told it, please stop, I don't want to hear this, I don't need this. And he said, no, it's very important, you have to understand this. They just go on and on. So this is something, don't do that. If you're in a big company, and even if you think it's very important for you, other people really don't care about the organizational structure. The auditor just cares about the organizational structure in that it influences the scope of the audit he's doing, but he's not interested at all in the overall organization. Okay, that's always also a winner. Have 2-hour lunches, preferably at a restaurant far away and preferably with lots of alcohol. And people are really annoyed because most auditors say, no, I just want, give me a sandwich, that's okay. I can eat it while I'm working. Because it's just wasting time. Nobody wants to go to a lunch in a 5-star restaurant. Larger companies have departments called internal audit with people whose job description is to confuse auditors. We're basically there to take care of auditors and just talk at them in detail and more detail and even more detail, and sometimes you have the impression they're trained to speak very fast so you can't interrupt them. Also just a way to waste time. Most bigger companies have them. The company has more than 2,000 or 3,000 employees. There's normally an internal audit department with someone there to confuse the quality auditor and the security auditor and the Umwelt auditor and what else you have got. Really annoying. And of course, if you have a company that actually builds something, that produces something, you have to take a tour to the production facility, and that can also take forever. And it's not even interesting. From an information security point of view, you don't really need to look at machines. You don't even need to look at data centers for a very long time. I mean, you need to go through just to see that the racks are closed and it looks more or less clean and everything looks okay. There's no old equipment standing around or loose cabling hanging around, but you don't need to stand for 2 hours in front of a rack with blinking lights. Doesn't make sense. You don't learn anything by doing that. But still, there are people who seem to think it's very important that the auditor sees every light-emitting diode from there. No, auditor doesn't want to see that. Okay, the other side. Enough talking about companies. There are, of course, also strange auditors. Auditors are in this role that they have to check what companies are doing and give advice on how to do things better. But the auditor doesn't really understand the company he's auditing. I mean, he's just there for a day or for 2 days or for 3 days. So the auditor doesn't know everything. And the good ones know that. The bad ones, of course, do strange things. For example, we've had this in one of our customers, where the ISO 27001 auditor checked every single first aid kit. Wow, I never would have never thought of that. What's that got to do with information security? We asked him if this has had to do with business continuity, and we were all laughing, but he was very serious about it. Nobody knows. That's also a classic. We have an information security auditor who explains to a major data center how personal firewalls work. And this is a topic that goes, if you have a professional data center that operates a couple of thousand servers and somebody comes along and explains, so you need to put a personal firewall on every server, they go, because you don't do that, you don't need that either. I mean, it's a nightmare in operations, in operational cost. Nobody does that. But that's of course something you have. People, sometimes you have the impression they barely can control their own PC, and they give advice to other people how to do that. It's also nice. I had an auditor at a producer of telling machines who didn't know what SAP was. I mean, you really expect people to know this acronym. And of course, that's difficult. Sometimes you get the urge to explain to the company how they could make much better profit. But it's of course not your place as an auditor to tell the company you're auditing how to do things different. You can tell them how to do better security, but of course you don't tell them how to improve their business strategy, because you can't. I mean, the auditor really has no idea what he's talking about in this case. Well, okay, everybody does that from time to time. That one's also a winner, the SAP viruses. Every auditor, of course, has his, in German we say, Steckenpferd. So audits are not all the same. Of course, the auditor has his personal opinion on some things, and there are sometimes the auditors have very strange things they want to talk about. And this was really good. We had an auditor once that was extremely interested in the risks incurred by somebody writing viruses on SAP. I mean, this is interesting as a concept. I mean, go write a virus for SAP. You can make lots of money with that, I think. But I've never seen one. I don't know if such a thing really exists. Really strange. Okay, after you've survived the audit has been there and gone, you get an audit report, and sometimes you already know when the auditor is there that the audit report is not going to be good. So, of course, you have to fight the auditor. You can either whine and say, oh my God, no, it's not my fault, and somebody else is to blame, but that of course doesn't change the report. You can argue with the auditor, say, okay, it's all it's all wrong. You didn't understand this stuff. Or you can say it was a bad day. Yesterday everything was working, it's just today. Can get personal with the auditor, can say, okay, you don't understand the standard. I understand the standard much better than you do. Quite a lot of people do that. There's an old saying about that. To argue with an auditor is like wrestling with a pig in the mud. After a while, you realize that the pig enjoys it. And it's very true. Auditors like arguing about stuff. Auditors like arguing about standards. I would advise you to join an auditor conference one day. You can see 50 people arguing about one single word in the standard, what it means, for hours on end. They're all very involved and excited about that. So this is something one should never do. If an audit report is wrong, and it happens, of course, then there are ways. You can go to the certification body, or you can go to the audit company. There are ways you can raise formal objections, and then it gets cleared up in time. There's no problem there. Of course, there are also auditors that are incompetent, and there are ways to clear this up, but you don't argue with the auditor about his understanding of the standard, because, of course, the auditor is there to give you his understanding of the standard. This doesn't make sense to argue about that. Okay, we're getting slowly to the end. The usual way of dealing with audits is you get a report, then you staple it, you put it into a binder, put it into the cabinet, and forget about it. That's what most companies do, and it's always amazing to do to me, because companies spend a lot of money on audits, and then they just ignore the findings. Or no, they don't ignore them. They know the auditor will come back next year, then they do it the night before. Of course, because somebody says, oh shit, tomorrow the auditor comes again, and then everybody has to do a night shift and do things very fast. It's better once a year than never, of course. But of course you can do it in a much easier way by doing it right away after the audit, because then you have lots of time. It's also cheap to do things if you have lots of time, because you can just do them in your spare time. If you do it the night before the audit, it's normally not very effective. And of course the auditor knows that everything is fake, because if he gets documents that are still warm from the laser printer, and the classic is all the evidence for all the processes last year has the change date of yesterday on it. So you know somebody typed all night and invented memos and mails and stuff like that to show that they've actually been doing something. It's a waste of money, really. I mean, why do audits, why do certifications if you do it that way? Just save your money and go to the certification then. Okay, that brings me to the end. I hope I could tell you some things that you do different in your company. quite a lot of things you can do. Obviously, I think the most important thing is to realize if you have an auditor coming, it's not an isolated occurrence. It's not just an auditor that comes, asks some stupid questions, and then leaves again. But that you involve the whole company, that you educate the staff about what to talk about with the auditor, and that you try to derive some benefit from the audit. A lot of companies, like I said in the beginning, treat the auditor as an enemy. He comes and then they are in the mindset, okay, make him go away. We don't want anything to do with that. If you get into the mindset that you actually can get some useful information out of the audit, most of the time, doesn't work every time, of course, but most of the time, then you can turn this into a positive experience, really. Also into an experience where you put money to good use. I always think it's a shame if companies pay lots of money for audits and then it's basically wasted. Because for the management part, I think it's also to a large extent really training your management. It's quite important. A lot of audits we do, you get the impression somebody talked the management into doing the audit, and the managers don't really want it. They think, okay, it just costs money. I'm doing it because my IT boss told me to do it, but I don't really understand this, and I don't want to understand this. Get lost, go away, don't bother me with it. This then goes wrong if you have an audit and this attitude gets out. The audit will probably fail if you do a formal certification audit. So you really need to educate your managers, and you can either do that yourself, or in a lot of cases it's easier to get a consultant to do that. Also because that's an external person, your boss can yell at consultants without anything bad happening. That's what you have consultants for.
Isn't the problem motivation? Why doing an audit? When I say I just want to have some sort of certification, or my customer said I need this, and it's not me I want it, but it's something outside driven. Then there's no understanding why I do this, and what is behind that, what is checked, and so. I think it really starts one step before. Why this audit has to be done.
Yeah, you have to work out the positive side. You have to explain. Okay, you can maybe save money by better security, or you have a need. The customers say, okay, we want you to have the certification, or we won't do any more business with you. Something like that. It's a good money is always a good motivation.
Okay, thanks again. Okay.
Thanks, Enno. Thanks.
Will you be around?
I'm here all day and tomorrow morning.